Hello, and thank you for joining us again for another episode of the Safety Mojo podcast. My name is Jeff Panting. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Mojo AI, and I've got Brian Camper, our resident safety pro.
Hey, how's it going, guys? And good morning, Jeff. How's it going?
Going well. Today, we're going to be talking about something on the more serious side of safety,
Yeah.
and that is suicide in the construction industry as part of the overall mental health issues in the industry. It's something that I'm seeing talked about more and more across the internet, across social media, at events where they do breakout sessions and workshops.
Right.
Like, it's becoming more of a topic for discussion, but that hasn't always been the case. Is that accurate, Brian?
It's very accurate, and it's definitely received, or it's starting to receive its proper responses from companies in the industry because it is. We'll get into details. It's such a higher rate than any other industry in the U.S. right now.
Yeah, yeah. In researching this topic, we saw some incredible stats. Like in the construction industry, the suicide rate is roughly 75% higher than any other
Yeah,
industry. Like in 2022, it's estimated that like 6,000 workers died by suicide. Like those are
yeah.
some
It's it's
shocking
it's
numbers.
yeah. It's way too many, and yeah, that 75% higher percentage rate than any other industry outside of law enforcement or military is it's absolutely through the roof, and it's something that definitely needs attention and it needs some awareness brought forward to it.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, it has effects, you know, all over, like not just for the company, but for, families, friends. And I mean,
Yeah,
it's devastating.
this is a topic that while we like to have nice back and forth on these podcasts and stuff, this is a topic that it's not easy to talk about, right? And that's also kind of one of the reasons why the suicide rate is so much higher in the construction industry, because it's not easy for men to talk, right? It's not easy for us to talk back and forth and for us to talk about our feelings. And we'll get into some of the factors on why it's higher, but it's a topic that we're going to dive into. We're going to discuss it on the workers level and the company's level, and as well as the family level, and what can be done to prevent it, and just to bring awareness to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's start there with, maybe talking about some of the factors that do contribute to this. Mental health overall is, a big and up and coming issue that contributes to this suicide
Yeah.
as well. That's kind of the result of mental health issues that that's the worst result out of this. But can you talk a little bit about in your experience as a safety pro in a lot of different locations, like what are some of the big contributors that you see to the issue of suicide?
So, by the way, I've unfortunately had the misfortune of having a couple colleagues take their lives, and it's something. This is a topic that's pretty near and dear to my heart. And when you look at it as a whole, and you try to look at the factors and break them down to where it makes sense to talk about them, especially in the construction industry, you got to start with the physical demands. It's such a high stress industry, and we all live with aches and pains as we get a little bit older. We all do this, we all do that. We maybe walk up the stairs a little bit slower, but if you spent your life or you spent over half your life in the construction industry, that physical toll on your body is enormous. And even that alone, having those chronic pains, those chronic illnesses, and which we'll get into, can lead to substance abuse and prescription drug abuse, and these are all factors that can go into, this being such a higher rate, but we got to start with the physical demands. The construction industry faces one of the most physically demanding industry. It just demands so much of your body. It's so labor intensive, and it's hard work. And the longer you're in it, and you're not, maybe you don't have access to all the right tools, you don't have access to the right medical surveillance. It can just wear you out. I have a cousin that's a lifelong iron worker, and he was a college football star and should have went to the pros and super athlete. He's worked in the iron workers for 15 years and he could barely walk up a flight of stairs. You know,
Oh, wow.
it's so the physical demands of it has got to be number one, right? We've got to talk about how, and we'll get into ways to raise awareness and prevention. But for now, let's talk about the factors, right? That's kind of where you want to focus.
Yeah.
And besides the physical demands, when we talk about construction industry, it's one of the most stressful outside of law enforcement. It's a different type of stress, but you got to imagine too, as a construction worker, it's kind of the same as oil and gas. You're wondering where your next project's going to be, right? Is it what's the weather going to be like? What's the economy going to be like? When you're working in the construction industry, especially on these bigger projects and for these bigger construction companies, it's very project based. It doesn't give you a lot of financial security. And let me stop right here and say, working in the construction industry and having a career in construction is absolutely a fantastic way to make a career, and it offers people fantastic ways to make a living, and it offers people that maybe wouldn't have other opportunities to make that amount of money. It really is one of these industries, kind of like the oil and gas industry, where if you walk in and you're willing to work and you're willing to show up and learn, even if you have a third grade education, you can end up making six figures, right? But that doesn't apply to everyone, and it doesn't mean that there's not these pressures, external pressures such as the physical demands, the job insecurity, and also the long hours. Kind of like the oil and gas industry, a lot of times, especially on these bigger projects, you're away from your family. Um, I know people in the construction industry that haven't been home in months. They go up to the Bay Area. Some of them just got done building the new stadium up there, or some new Google complexes up there, and they hadn't been home in 2 months. A lot, those pressures between the physical demands, the financial insecurities, and just not being home. Even just those three right there, it's a recipe for mental instability, and for mental health to crumble.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. You always hear industries like oil and gas are, boom or bust. You're always somewhere on that cycle. And,
Yeah.
I hadn't considered how, being in an industry like that would be, stressful when you're thinking, or when you see signs like, oh, we're moving into a bust cycle. Yeah, that's got
Yeah,
to be
because
very stressful.
we know we shouldn't, right? But I'm guilty of this too in the oil and gas industry. And when the construction industry is the same way, when you're working a lot and you're doing really well, you adjust your means of living, right? And you adjust, you know. And by the way, the construction industry, much like the oil and gas industry, it's very blue collar. People are there to support their families, their husbands, wives, children, mothers, fathers, whatever it may be for you, right? And it definitely, you're trying to make it better than what you had, right? So when
Hmm.
you're making hay and the construction industry is going crazy, we do fall trap sometimes to that adjusting our way of life. And then when we take a hit, or maybe there's delays in projects, or an economic downturn, that financial burden becomes even heavier on those in the construction industry that maybe are struggling a little bit more than others. And it tell you what, the financial aspect of this really needs to be looked at almost as much as the physical aspect.
Yeah, that's a good point. And what about, within an organization, whether it's an oil and gas company or, a construction company, what about like the company culture around things like
Yeah.
bullying and hazing? What
So,
are your thoughts on that? Like based on,
it-
the companies that you've been a part of?
so first we'll get into, we'll put it this way: on a construction site, or an oil and gas rig, really any male driven. Let's just be honest. We're gonna put ourselves out there right now. Any male driven industry, the amount of machismo, macho ness, like you said, hazing, bullying, it's definitely part. There is toxic masculinity, right, on almost every construction site you can go on. There's also a stigma around, you're not supposed to talk about your feelings, right? You're not supposed to open up and say you're having a bad day, right? In mainstream culture right now, there's this big push. It's okay to not be okay, right? Try that on a construction site, you'll get ran off, right? So, it being part of the culture is definitely an issue as well. What I will talk about in a little bit, though, I actually think it's the exact opposite, in that the construction industry as a whole, yes, we're hard on each other, right? And yes, there's hazing going on, and there's guys that you think on the job site right now that can't stand you, or have nothing good to say to you. But at the same time, those are the same people that, if you needed something, they'd be right there to have your back. And that's definitely something that I want to talk about here in a little bit when we talk about the awareness, the prevention part of this.
Yeah. Yeah, in your experience in, working all over the globe, in different countries, including the U.S., have you seen like racism and discrimination being an issue that contributes to mental health problems and suicide?
I would say on a very rare case, but yes, even on a rare case is too many, right? Bullying doesn't have a place on the job site, right? And there's a fine line between having fun with someone and being a bully, and crossing that line over to bullying and making it where someone doesn't feel valued on the job site, or someone doesn't feel safe on the job site. And I use that term loosely. It has no place in today's industry, right? And when you factor that in with some of the three aspects that we talked about earlier: the physical demands, the financial aspects, the long hours, the time away from family, and then you got to go to a job site where someone is bullying you. Come on, man. It's, again, not to be cliche, but we're creating a recipe for disaster. And I unfortunately have seen it, and I've seen it lead to unfortunate results. But having a culture in place, and we'll talk about that, has got to be part of your prevention steps. But unfortunately, yeah, bullying does play a role in this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk now about the other side of this. What can an organization do, or what can a safety leader do, or an operations person? Like, what are some things that people can do to build, a better workplace culture to, address and manage these types of, stresses and negative work environments that contribute to mental health issues and contribute to suicides? Like, what can a company do?
So some of the most successful ones that I've seen, and by the way, we doesn't matter the industry. We've put them in place on our sites. Is even if it's just a couple dedicated, designated individuals, having a couple designated individuals actually go through and complete some SAMHSA training, complete some mental awareness training, and make themselves be known on the job site as, hey, I'm here, right? If you want to come talk to me. And I know that's gonna receive a lot of eye rolls at first. And it did in our industry as well, right? It did in our organization. But believe it or not, it actually worked, right? And the way I put it is, first and foremost, you as the worker or the manager or the person that maybe is having questions about or having these struggles, you have to be able to unisolate yourself, because quite often it is the isolation that causes this, right? You hide the financial issues from your partner. You hide your physical pains from your kids because you don't want them to see you crippling around, right?
Mm-hmm.
You hide the mental illness from people at work because you don't want to seem weak. So you spend all this time hiding everything and isolating yourself from everyone else on the job site, sometimes without even knowing it. Knocking down those barriers on the job site between foremen, supervisors, even coworker to coworker, and making sure that they're aware that, hey, there's people that you could talk to, right? Maybe you don't want to talk to a shrink, maybe you don't want to talk to someone that's not on the job site, but putting some people in place that you can talk to, you know, that makes all the difference in the world. It brings them in, brings you out of that shell and into a place where you know you're not alone. So that's first and foremost, right? It's breaking that stigma of it can't be talked about on the job site, right? Or that no one wants to hear it. Because the reality is, if you do choose that situation and you go through with it, I'll tell you this right now: on any type of job site, whether it's construction, highway construction, uh, industrial construction, there's no one on the job site that says, "Man, we're glad that guy's not here anymore." Right? Everyone's left with remorse. So, opening up to it, opening up to talking to people, getting those people training as the company, having some designated people. That's first and foremost. Some other really effective measures that I've seen put in place is having proactive physical therapy
Hmm.
access. Right, with the demands of the work, quite often we in the construction industry, the oil and gas industry, whatever it might be, we'll work till we fall down, right? That's just the reality of the industry. If we make more awareness, not just on the mental health, but on the physical health side of it too, like, hey, there's these options available to you. Maybe it's massage therapy, maybe it's physical therapy, looking at mechanisms, tooling mechanisms, ergonomics, all these things that can go through and reduce, because we talked about the number one factor, the chronic pains, the long term disabilities that decayed mental health. If we can avoid those by focusing on physical health as well and being proactive about it, to me, that's those two right there can be huge, can help hugely reduce that 75% increase.
Yeah. Yeah, those are all good points. I have kind of a side question about this.
Yeah,
Traditionally, the oil and gas industry, like safety has been a part of that industry for longer, or has had like a more prominent place
right.
in the operations of that industry versus construction. Does that mean, in your experience, that mental health awareness has been increasing or more prominent in oil and gas versus construction?
I
Or
would
are they
have to
both
agree.
lagging behind where they should be?
Um, it depends on the company culture, right? As a whole, I would say oil and gas is, you know, a little bit ahead of this in the construction industry. Kind of like the things that you said about health and safety, due to just events being more of a focus. But it really depends on the company. I've been lucky enough to be part of some companies that really did focus on this, even overseas, even here domestically, that had really good programs put in place for mental awareness, for suicide prevention, and suicide awareness. And they really promoted that mental health awareness. They really had a really good support system, and that's something too that you know when we talk about getting help for maybe a mental illness or mental difficulties in the construction industry, it's again, it's still, even just saying it is going to make a lot of our listeners go, ugh, no. But the reality is, there are so many ways to get help nowadays that are even targeted to the construction industry, and that's something that we worked on too in the oil and gas industry with a company. Unfortunately, I can't mention them by name,
Sure.
but they actually built a center, a communication center, and they staffed it with actual retired oil and gas workers and people that were expats as well and traveling, so that if you had to call in and you want to talk about maybe some pressures you were having or maybe some dark thoughts, just to put it bluntly, you were talking to someone that actually knew your job as well and knew about has been through there, and that's something else too when we talk about these designated individuals on the job site. And again, this is from the worker's point of view. If you're having these thoughts and you're having these considerations and you're facing either any of these factors, know that someone else on that job site has gone through the same thing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and because we've all gone through it. I'm going to be honest. There's been even times that I've thoughts have crossed my mind, right, when I'm in dark places and stuff overseas, and but seek out those. I don't want to say old heads, but as much as someone might ride you or give you a hard time, like I said in the beginning, there's not one person on the construction site that would be glad that you're gone, right? Some of the biggest support systems that you have is they're on site with you. You got to be open to communicating, and we've got to normalize even that interpersonal communication on the construction site, kind of the opposite of bullying. I'm not saying we all have to sit down in a circle, sing Kumbaya, and hold hands, but being willing to listen. And sometimes that's all someone needs is just someone to listen to them. But back to your original answer or question, I think it's really important to have these aspects, and where the construction industry can definitely change those stats. It's not going to take a huge amount of effort, right? It's going to take some culture change and making things a little more available to the individuals.
Yeah. In in your experience, have you seen any other, small things that a company can do to help with either mental health awareness or support systems for companies? Like we talked about, some major things like having dedicated people there or educational, or counseling resources available. Are there any other, smaller things that you've seen that would be like easy for a smaller organization to implement?
Yeah, and so one of the things we talked about was job security, right? And even the long hours, and even though that we say that's just part of the job, that that's just the way it is in the construction industry. Really prioritizing your workforce, whether you're a small company or a large company, and prioritizing that work-life balance for your workers can be huge, right? And it might take a little more stress on maybe some administrative staff or some managerial staff to balance that. But putting that focus on the work-life balance as well of your workers can definitely go a long way in all of this, right? Um, Obviously, if there was no financial issues, we'd all be great, but we can't just say pay everyone more money because that's not the way things work. But even small companies can offer more, maybe more financial education, right? Or maybe more financial resources. Um, and that's something that's severely lacking. It was severely lacking in the oil and gas industry, by the way, for the longest time. North Dakota is a perfect example of that. People that made $7 an hour minimum wage their entire life was making 100. All of a sudden we're making $100,000 a year, but they were broke and filing for bankruptcy 2 years later, right? Because they
Mm-hmm.
had no financial education. So bringing in, like we said, um, physical health, right? Breaking down the stigma of the mental health, the stigma about it, making that it's open, some planning, that work-life balance, and some financial education as well. If these four things don't require a huge amount of investment or time, really. So it doesn't matter if you're a small company or a large company. If you can focus on these four and at least lay down the foundation and really get it implemented into your culture, we can definitely drive that number down and really get the construction industry to where, even if it saves one life, it's worth it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Um,
And there's something else too that we haven't really talked about that quite often becomes a factor, and we kind of touched on it a bit. The substance abuse part of this, right? Um, and I'm gonna word this from the pharmaceutical part of it, or the maybe the prescription drug abuse. If you're waking up in chronic pain every single day and you're struggling just to get through, just to get up to go to work, but you have to go because you have a family that depends on you. Unfortunately, the prescription drug abuse is higher in the construction industry as well, and unfortunately, it does become something that is, it's medicine to get them through the day, right? But that does have an effect on your mental health, and so making sure that substance abuse programs are available as well. And this goes back to, we keep talking about the cause and then the solutions. If you put into that in place a really good physical health program as well, you can at least reduce those physical demands, whether it's through physical health, technology, tooling, equipment, work scheduling. There's so many different ways to look at it, but you can solve maybe some of the physical demands, which will in turn maybe reduce the substance abuse um, problem that does involve that there is in the industry as well.
yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And I like that, you talked about multiple ways to approach this. And, it's impossible for any organization to go from nothing, like no mental health resources or plan,
Right.
to, an amazing world class mental health workforce like that. But, one thing that I hope people are taking away is that there are small things that you can do, that you can
100%.
implement fairly easily, that can have an impact. And, it is an ongoing thing. It's not something you can just try once and then problems are solved. But
No,
I like that you mentioned there are small things that any organization can do to take steps in the right direction.
yeah, and even the small steps can have the biggest impacts, right? And just having those leaders or those designated individuals on site that and by the way, on almost every construction site, there are those people that they want to help, right? And so finding these people, getting them to be the designated people, it's not going to be hard, right? And on almost every construction site, again, you're going to find someone that's been there, that's been where you've been and gone through what you're going through. And just to put a little bit of personal context, I went through and it's still not finalized, but a pretty nasty divorce with 6 kids. Outside of my significant other, some of the biggest rocks that I've had, and support through this process was me being brave enough to open up to my coworkers, and that support foundation that I got from my coworkers during that time, man, I'm telling you right now, it was invaluable. It was amazing. And, it took me being brave enough to open up. And I don't want to make this about me, but I just saying that there are people that will listen and that care about you and want to be there for you on your job site right this moment. And, you know, it takes you talking to them.
Yeah, yeah, that's good to mention. Um, well, as we close out, this conversation, I do want to mention a couple of resources for our listeners.
Yeah.
The phone number 988 is for the suicide and crisis lifeline, just like 911, but for suicide and crisis issues, that's 988. And then also there's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. The number for that is 800 273 8255. And I want to thank you again, Brian, for having this conversation with us about this like super important topic that, I mean, it's good that it's being talked about more, but like you've kind of highlighted, there's still a lot of work to go in the industry.
Yeah, there's a lot of work, but it's still like we keep talking about small steps, even whether it's a big company, small company, breaking down that stigma, making it okay to talk to each other, um, monitoring that physical demands, and like I said, we could do it through technology. We could do it by improving the tooling that we have, maybe reduce the physical labor portion of it. We could do it through rotation. We could do it through job scheduling. We can offer financial, education. We could offer physical therapies, focus on physical health, mental health, and financial health. And like we've said, it doesn't take a lot, right? A small focus on even a 1% improvement each day, right?
Yep.
At the end of the year, those numbers can drive down drastically. So that's one thing I do want to encourage all companies, supervisors, foremans, whatever your role might be within your company or owners of the company. Like Jeff said, it doesn't have to start out a world class program, right? But you have to take the first step, right? That first step is just talking about it, right? And once you get talking about it and you get it out there and you're aware of it, the ball just rolls downhill from there. And this is a topic that we need to do that. We need to talk about it. We need to bring it up. We need to make because it's something that's completely avoidable.
Yep. Yeah. Well, thank you again for joining us, Brian, and we're looking forward to the next conversation.
No,
Thanks,
thank you,
everybody.
Jeff, and thanks.